Robby, what is on your radar?
So yesterday, the hosts of The View opened their show with an extended criticism of former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard and Fox News host Tucker Carlson for allegedly spreading, quote, false Russian propaganda relating to Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. They also called on the U.S. Department of Justice to investigate the pair. Quote, they used to arrest people for doing stuff like this, lamented Whoopi Goldberg. Let's watch.
But I think that's an incredibly relevant question. Yeah. And I think DOJ, in the same way that it is setting up a task force to investigate oligarchs, should look into people who are Russian propagandists and shilling for Putin. That's being, if you are a foreign asset to a dictator, it should be investigated. In fact, I remember when Tulsi Gabbard, and I even hate that we're discussing it because I think to myself, who is this woman?
They used to arrest people for doing stuff like this. If they thought you were colluding with a Russian agent, if they thought you were putting out information or taking information and handing over to Russia. Yeah. They used to actually investigate stuff like this, and I guess now, there seems to be no bars.
So I gather that Goldberg was referring to U.S. government efforts to root out Russian spies who fed information to the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And yes, it is indeed a crime to share state secrets with hostile foreign governments. That's not what Gabbard did, and that's not what Carlson did. It's not even close. Gabbard and Carlson and others who take a contrarian position on the Russia-Ukraine conflict are engaged in speech that's protected by the First Amendment. Their views might be wrong, but they are free to share them. Americans do not suddenly lose their rights to express political opinions that are disfavored by the mainstream media and the U.S. government in the event of a war between two other nations. Indeed, we should not lose our right to free speech even if the U.S. itself goes to war. A century ago, during World War I, the U.S. Supreme Court placed unfortunate restrictions on the rights of Americans to organize against war. While the decisions in Schenck versus Ohio and Debs versus U.S. were never explicitly overturned, subsequent court decisions gradually invalidated the logic behind them. The modern Supreme Court takes a fairly maximal position on the First Amendment and the right to express anti-war views, even if some people view them as offensive, insensitive, or inaccurate. That's now well established, that right. The DOJ can't investigate Carlson for sounding insufficiently hostile to Vladimir Putin. Gabbard's statements are also protected by the First Amendment, even if they constitute false Russian propaganda. But look, it's worth taking a closer look at her most recent claim because I'm not actually at all convinced it was characterized fairly. Let's listen to what she said.
Here are the undeniable facts. There are 25 to 30 U.S.-funded biolabs in Ukraine. According to the U.S. government, these biolabs are conducting research on dangerous pathogens. Ukraine is in an active war zone with widespread bombing, artillery, and shelling, and these facilities, even in the best of circumstances, could easily be compromised and release these deadly pathogens.
So that line about U.S.-funded biolabs in Ukraine was branded Russian disinformation by the Washington Post, and Senator Mitt Romney called it treasonous lies. Now, to be clear, there's nothing treasonous about what she said, even if it was wrong. Treason is a crime. Theoretically, repeating Putin's justifications for war is not a crime. It's clearly not entirely wrong here, though, either. Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland recently confirmed to Senator Marco Rubio that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that Ukraine does indeed possess biological research facilities, and that she's worried about Russia taking them. Quoting the State Department, the New York Times described them as diagnostic and biodefense laboratories rather than biological weapons facilities. That sounds like gain-of-function research definition denial to me. The Time goes on to quote Robert Pope, director of the Pentagon's Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. Quote, Mr. Pope had warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine may damage laboratories in the country that conduct research and disease surveillance and are supported by the United States. He noted that some of the facilities may contain pathogens once used for Soviet-era bioweapons programs, but he emphasized that the Ukrainian labs currently did not have the ability to manufacture bioweapons. Quote, there is no place that still has any of the sort of infrastructure for researching or producing biological weapons, Mr. Pope said. Quote, scientists being scientists, it wouldn't surprise me if some of these strain collections in some of these laboratories still have pathogen strains that go all the way back to the origins of that program, end quote. Scientists being scientists? Well, forgive me for not being entirely set at ease by this, especially given what the public has learned about lax oversight in U.S.-funded foreign laboratories that conduct research on pathogens. A laboratory's research on pathogens can be of great concern whether or not the research is being used to create a weapon on purpose. Similarly, most people who suspect that COVID-19 emerged from the Wuhan laboratory, they think it was an accident, not a deliberate biological weapons program. Again, it's perfectly possible there's no real danger here. To be fair, both the Russians and Gabbard have raised erroneous concerns, maybe, about the laboratories. I don't know. I'm not sure how anyone, though, could be entirely certain that's the case. Indeed, while the Washington Post fact-check laments that the American right has embraced Russian disinformation about U.S. bioweapon labs in Ukraine, well, the actual article claims the loss of power to the lab in Kharkiv could inadvertently result in the release of several pathogens. And a Polish infectious disease epidemiologist said Kharkiv's Institute of Experimental and Clinical Veterinary Medicine is one of the best labs between Greifswald, Germany, and Pokrov, Russia, a distance of about 1,300 miles, wrote the Post's Glenn Kessler. He said anthrax, avian influenza viruses, Francisella I can't even pronounce some of these, Brucella, Salmonella, Borrelia sensu lato, and the coronavirus. All of these things were studied at Kharkiv, a city now under siege with active agents stored until the invasion. And the hosts of The View want the DOJ to investigate or even imprison political commentators who are vexed by all of this. Really, it's a textbook example of why the mainstream media's push to outlaw so-called disinformation is deeply, deeply irresponsible. What about you guys? Are you nothing to see here? No. What are you worried about? Russian disinformation to have any concern about this?
As long as the power stays on,
sure,
then the pathogens are fine.
Scientists will be scientists, but when has that ever gone wrong before?
Yeah, there's two things that I want to bring up while listening to this that kind of stick out to me. And the first is, it's interesting that these ladies are calling for the imprisonment and the investigation of these people who are dissenting in some way or bringing up some issues, right? And these are the same people that then criticize Putin and say, well, he locks up dissenters, he locks up protesters, people who call out his war crimes or say that or go against the war, right? So it's interesting that it's bad for Putin to do it, but it's okay for us to do it, to point out political dissenters. And Putin sits there and says, well, the reason why I'm jailing these people is because I believe they're foreign agents. I believe that they're actually set up and sponsored by the West, that they're infiltrating, and that's what they're here to do. So that stands out to me. And then secondly, another thing that, when you brought up the courts and that the courts have decided that there's certain speech that is protected, my fear is, as women of The View and others express these sort of anti-free speech sentiments that I would consider anti-free speech, the courts tend to change through time based on the culture of society. And we know that Supreme Court rulings have changed from one era to another. And my fear is, as society continues to adopt this idea of censoring, that the courts eventually, as we get new Supreme Court justices in, that they will say, yes, there are certain things you're not allowed to say. And that worries me quite a bit.
Yeah, it's really easy to see in hindsight how it was that not just Eugene Debs got locked up in World War I for opposing that war, but how so many good liberals who were supporters of FDR, supporters of the New Deal, were also supportive of interning thousands of Japanese people during World War II. When you see that mentality, and Keith Olbermann yesterday, I think, replied to the View ladies and was like, wanted to take it even further, like arrest them immediately, but show that we're a good democracy.
Trials are a luxury of, right? Didn't he say something like that?
It was not entirely clear if he was supporting a luxurious trial or saying that a trial is luxury and so therefore should not be allowed to people like Tucker Carlson. But you can see how a Keith Olbermann in 1942 is like, yes, round up all the Japanese. It's better to be safe than sorry.
Right.
This is a war. And we've spent 50, 60, 70 years since then condemning that. And apparently that wasn't enough to inculcate people's rage, to say to people, don't give in to those impulses the next time that another war comes around. And we're not even in this war, which is the other war. Wow, this is a war between Russia and Ukraine. It is natural to be deeply sympathetic with Ukraine because they've been invaded by another country. But Russia hasn't invaded the U.S. the way that Japan, attacked Hawaii.
Right.
And so, it makes me deeply concerned about what huge swaths of the country would be and are willing to do in times of a real national security crisis.
And these are supposed to be political commentators who are so ignorant about basic precepts of the First Amendment that it is not at all the same to like I don't know, obtain, infiltrate the CIA or something and obtain information on some U.S. defense system and then share that with the Russian government. Yes, that is treason.
Yeah. And also, yes,
not just saying you disagree with our approach to Russia is clearly not treason.
And if you are an unregistered asset of a foreign government, I think Tony Podesta got charged with this, right? Or at least his lobbying firm got charged. What have been Ukraine, actually? Was it? I don't know. We could Google that. It might have been. There was some, but a lot of foreign governments will, fund different propaganda efforts inside the United States. You're supposed to register. If you don't register and you're doing it specifically on their behalf, and you're doing it on their behalf, then you can be charged with a federal crime. Fine. But that doesn't seem to be exactly what they're talking about.
Well, and that's not what Tulsi and Tucker are doing. You might think they're wrong. I probably think they're wrong about some of the things they're saying on these topics. I don't know at all that they're wrong about the whole laboratory situation. But they're saying these things because they believe them, or they have viewers and supporters who believe them, and they're giving voice to what the viewers. It's the lamest kind of. Right. They're being paid by the Russian government. No, they're not.
Right. And the Tulsi thing seems to be actually true. Like she seemed to be pretty careful about, is it 25 to 30? I don't know if it's exactly 25 to 30.
It seemed like it was at least 6 based on my,
and
fine.
People have said dozens, and what's a facility, and are there 8 facilities within one facility? Yeah. Fine. You want to quibble with her number?
It's not a weapons lab. It's just a lab where there are dangerous pathogens that are stored, and some of those pathogens can only kill animals, but who knows? Scientists being scientists, we don't know what they've been doing.
Which goes to the point that you were making about the View ladies, that they're okay themselves imprisoning dissenters and critics because their motives are good.
Right.
But Putin's motives are bad. And it's okay for us to do a biodefense lab. That's for defense.
Sure.
Bioweapon lab. Right. That's crazy.
So when I tweeted about this, I had some people responding to me saying, like, you're accusing me this. You're parroting Russian propaganda, and you should, ask a scientist, ask a health official what they think about these labs. I'm like, these are the same people. Look, I won't entirely discount what they're saying. It gives some comfort if they say there's nothing to be worried about in those labs, but some of these people are the same people who say there's nothing to be worried about what's going on in Wuhan, and there's nothing to be worried about gain-of-function research or EcoHealth Alliance. Fauci's saying that, no, it's all above board. Sorry, these people don't have credibility with me and with the American people.
But some of them also said there's nothing to worry about as long as the power doesn't go out in the city that's being bombarded. Then there might be something to worry about.
Unbelievable. But it's just Russian propaganda, so my apologies.
It might also be Russian propaganda.
It might be both.
Yes.
Could be right.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm looking forward to your radar coming up next, Ryan.